At Remedy Live, we're so committed to meaningful conversations, committed to hearing people's stories and making sure that when you watch these programs, when you watch these podcasts and these shows, that you see yourself in these stories. You see that you too, the journey you're on is not so much different than others. And today we're blessed that we have a conversation with Judge Ashley Hand from the Fort Wayne area. And Judge Hand, I'm just going to share it right off the top. You got a lot of fans, a lot of people that love you, people that work with you, people that have been in your court. I have some friends that are former judges that you know really well. Thank you for being a part of this conversation today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Can you give us kind of the skinny on what you do, what your court's about, how long you've been serving as a judge, and anything else that's relevant to that whole world?
Yeah, so I'm Ashley Hand, judge of the Allen Circuit Court. I've been appointed by the Governor Holcomb back on July 19th of 2023. But prior to that, I served as a magistrate in the Allen Circuit Court from April 1, 2020 till now. So I've been with Circuit Court for a few years. The Allen Circuit Court deals with a variety of cases. We have family cases. That would be anything from divorce or custody cases, child support cases or paternity cases, civil cases, and our criminal court. We deal with those individuals that have felony traffic-related offenses. And so we have 3 problem-solving courts, all of which are focused on dealing with individuals struggling with mental illness and alcohol or drug-related addictions. So we handle all of those cases every single day. So it's a lot going on any given day. No doubt.
And other people that I have as friends that are serving in the courts like you are, that's some heavy stuff. These are people's lives that you're dealing with, and I know that you take that seriously, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I was so excited to get you in the studio, is because it's been clear from others that have said this that you have a very compassionate heart, but you still have to do your job as a judge. So since you were a little girl, was it always like, I want to be a judge? Is that what we grew up thinking?
Well, not quite little, but when I was in 7th grade, I did decide that I wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay, gotcha.
And I didn't know any lawyers, didn't know anything about being a lawyer, cannot tell you why, other than it was just, God placed it on my heart, honestly, that I wanted to be a lawyer. And from that point on, I just did whatever I thought I needed to do to become a lawyer. I think looking back, I can tell you it was just the circumstances that I was in, that I knew that I could make a difference and do something different. But I didn't know what it was at the time. And so I just worked really hard in school. I wanted something different than what I had currently. And so that was my initial start to it. So I wound up going through college and law school, and I'm just practicing law, doing what I love doing, which was family law at the time. I spent 13 years doing family law. When I came out of law school, I really just wanted a job. It was 2008, so we were in the middle of the recession, and this law firm approached me and said they needed someone to do family law. I initially wanted to do transactional work because I don't really like public speaking or being the center of attention.
Or maybe on camera.
Or on camera at all.
Yeah,
so I thought transactional work would be what I wanted to do, but I wanted a job, and they said they had this position, and I thought, I'm pretty much seeing everything that can happen in a custody case growing up, so yeah, I can do that. And so I became a family lawyer, and I can tell you I knew from the minute that I started that it was exactly where I was supposed to be.
Yeah, would you call it a calling?
Absolutely. I grew up, I had to testify in my parents' custody case, and so when I was placed in the position as the lawyer to ask my client how they wanted to proceed with their case, a lot of clients want to have their child come in and testify, especially when there's a custody case. Kids will end up being involved in some fashion.
Sure.
And so parents want to have their children have a say. And I was lucky enough that I was in a position that I could kind of help direct people on how they were going to handle their case. And I made it a personal mission that they were not going to call their child if I was their lawyer. And so whenever people would tell me that that's what they wanted to do, I would simply tell them that's great and that's your right to do it, but you won't do that with me as your lawyer. And so it required them to then have a conversation with me as to why that was something that was important and why I was telling them it was not a good idea. And so I just walk them through those scenarios. Like, number one, they probably don't really want to be involved in your case. They're just telling you what they think you want to hear. Yeah. That's what kids do. They tell you what will please you, what will make you happy. They don't want to get in trouble. And so they're probably telling both parents the same thing. And both of them telling them that they want to live with them. And so it's not a lot of benefit to have them in there, but you're also doing so much damage to your relationship with that child, to the trauma that you're placing that child in by having them come into court. And some of them would believe me when I would tell them that, but I would often have to share the fact that, I was 14 and I stood in the middle of the DeKalb County Courthouse waiting to go talk to a judge. And there is a feeling that will never leave my soul, having to sit there waiting out there. I'm 40 years old today, and I can tell you that telling anybody the story will make me feel as if I'm standing right there in that room all over again.
Well, you mentioned the word trauma earlier. The divorce is one of the top 10 adverse childhood experience traumas that we now know thanks to the Kaiser Permanente study. And, the fact that you can have that context, that you can have that clarity for the generation that sometimes doesn't get always represented because, again, you're representing mom and dad or you're talking to mom and dad as a lawyer back in those days. Again, I believe that God places certain people in certain situations. So thank you for being courageous enough because, honestly, I've seen so many people run from those types of responsibilities. Why weren't you one of them? You went through this as someone that watched your parents struggle in their marriage. Why weren't you just like everybody else and escape into something else rather than try to be a part of the solution long term?
I knew that I could never put somebody in the position that my parents put me in. Again, it's a feeling that will never leave how I feel as a person. And so even now I get asked to interview children in camera as the judge. I always tell them I'll take it under advisement and I will wait till the end of the case to see if it's something that's necessary. And when I'm making a decision as to whether or not to talk to a child, the number one thing I'm looking at is how that's going to impact the child long term and if it's really even necessary for my case. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you the majority of the time, it's not. A handful of times I've thought it was appropriate to interview the child, but oftentimes even when you do that, you don't get the information that either parent really thinks they're going to give. They'll say things very generic like, I love my mom, I love my dad, I just want them to stop fighting. It's not, my mom's really terrible, unless they've been coached by a parent. My mom's really terrible, she's doing all of these things. It's really not helpful to their overall case. And oftentimes, it's ultimately going to damage that relationship with their parent because you've placed them in the situation where they have to pick. And even if you don't tell them that they're picking, any teenager knows why they're there. Yeah. And that's a really hard place to put a child because they don't want to pick a parent. They want both of their parents to be good. I mean, that's what I wanted for my parents, and it just wasn't a possibility. So to me, it was just very important to be able to help those that could not help themselves.
Yes.
And we do have an obligation to do that. Even when you're dealing with the problem-solving courts, helping families that are struggling with mental illness and addiction, I look at it all about how it comes back to impact those families and the children in our community. Because if I can help mom or dad solve their alcohol addiction or get them treatment to work through that, I know I'm ultimately making a better place for those kids in those homes. Because
Yes.
if they can't parent because of their addiction, I'm ultimately going to see those children in a different capacity, whether they're involved with the Department of Child Services or even delinquency cases, something else. So while I don't mind doing criminal work, my heart and my passion has always been with families and kids in our community. And this is just the natural transition to be able to do one step beyond. Like instead of just focusing on the kids, I'm focusing on the parents that are going to ultimately have a bigger impact on how they're going forward to parent those children by working on their mental illness. A lot of these parents that we see in our court have never dealt with the trauma that caused them to have their drug and alcohol addiction or the mental illness that they're struggling with. They haven't worked through those things in any meaningful way. They've buried it. They've used drugs and alcohol to cope with whatever their struggles were.
So you probably see multi-generational trauma in
Absolutely.
your courtroom. Yeah.
I mean, I will see the mother that's in there with her OWI working through our problem-solving court while she's also struggling with a divorce or has children that are in foster care that she's trying to get back through all of this. And so you can see the dynamic of how all of these facets of the law play into each other. And then I've even seen, kids that, were their parents were going through a divorce. I've seen them come through and they're struggling with the same relationship issues that their parents were struggling with, and they're going through a divorce or having kids at a very young age and have paternity cases that are being set up. So it really all plays in together. All of these aspects do.
Well, I love that you're looking at it as a family unit to be able to help at a 10,000 foot altitude rather than just staying in that trench, which is still what you're doing as well. I'm passionate about this. My mom collected husbands. I had 5 different dads growing up, and I wasn't in a divorce court like you're describing, but I have to really give credit to those broken situations as to why I escaped into substances and escaped into all kinds of brokenness. And thank goodness that I had a person who cared enough about me to friend up and help me out of that and show me what it looks like to live your life on purpose. But I want to talk about your journey, right, and how you got here. You've already given us a little bit to know the past of your story, but take us back to your childhood, if you will, and just share with us just what it was that was going on in your home. And then at some point before we leave, I want you to talk about your incredible family, because you not just do this in the courtroom, but I see you at hockey games. You're a good mom, especially if you're a hockey mom. So tell us about the journey of where you've come from.
So my parents divorced when I was 5. My mom had me when she was 16 years old, my sister when she was 17. I joke and tell her she loved teenage pregnancy so much she did it twice. But I wouldn't say collected husbands, but she was married 5 times over the course of my life. At least 2 of them to the same individual. And they had, my parents were young when they got married. I think they did the best that they could. They had 2 kids in high school, and then it was just a bad relationship. And together, they were very toxic. I don't remember much about them being together as a married couple, but I spent the next now 9 years after that with my father either not being involved in the picture. He remarried, had 2 children with another woman. My mom was in a series of terrible relationships after that. My dad was abusive towards my mom during their marriage. I watched, the first memory I have is my father beating my mother while she was pregnant with my her third child. She ended up having that baby early. I don't think I even knew that that's probably what caused him to come early, but that's the first memory that I have of my parents. I mean, as a kid, you don't remember everything, but you remember certain things, and they're either really good experiences or they're really bad. And I love my dad. I don't say this that I don't, because he's a fantastic person now. At the time, some people don't work together, and they definitely did not work together. And then over the next 4 or 5 years, my dad really didn't participate much in our lives. We would see him a couple times a year. I would fantasize and think that things would be better if I lived with my dad as opposed to my mom, because she just changed one abusive relationship after another. And more responsibility would begin to be placed on me at a young age that I just thought was normal. I would take care of my younger brothers and sisters. My mom has 4 kids, so she had 1 other child after my brother, after my dad and her separated. And she would started working second shift, so we wouldn't even see her. So when babysitters are very difficult to find in general, but back then even second shift was hard. So I would oftentimes be left home with my younger siblings. My sister's 1 year younger than me. I have a brother that's 5 years younger than me, and then another one that's 7 years younger than me. So I would be 8 years old taking care of a very young baby. And my sister was there with me doing as much work as I was. But you watch your mom going through these abusive relationships, seeing her get physically beat by various people, and it's hard. And I remember times when she would come to me and tell me, I don't know why this person doesn't love me, or what I'm doing wrong. And I remember having very adult conversations with my mom at a young age, like at 9 and 10, saying, I'm not sure that this is love. But she couldn't see that. She needed those relationships to feel important, I guess. And ultimately, one of those abusive relationships is what led to my dad getting custody of us. My mom's 3rd husband, who she married twice, was one. He had ended up choking me when I intervened with him hitting my younger brother. And so my dad found out about it and became very upset. And ended up contacting the police and seeking emergency custody of us. And I remember not being upset that my dad was doing it. I was more upset with my mom that she could not make the decision that would be beneficial to her kids. And when I tell you about having to stand in the custody case, like this is a situation where I'm standing in the courthouse and my mom could not make a decision to choose her 3 kids over this person that was, abusing her.
Which again, just from your expertise, is incredibly common, right?
It is very common. I mean, I understand that she's struggling with some self-esteem issues and this is her way of feeling loved. But she had 3 kids. I was cooking meals for the whole family. She would hand me $40. Like, we had nothing. $40 is to get us a family of 6 food for the week, and she'd give me the money to do it because my mom wasn't very good at managing her personal finances. She has an accounting degree, but personally she could not manage her own budget. So she would give me $40 and say, we need meals for the week. And I would create the grocery list. She would take me to the store. We would go get the groceries. And then I would plan the meals and take care of cooking those meals at 13 and 14. It was even younger than that too. And that was normal to me. I realize now as I have a 14-year-old that is not something that I would ever put on my 14-year-old child, but that was just my role in the family. And when she was upset that he had hit me or had choked me and hit my brother, but she could not do anything to pull away from this individual. And unfortunately, it caused her to go through a series of mental illness episodes. She tried to kill herself a couple times when she lost us, but I can tell you some of the hardest, not only standing in that courtroom is the hardest memory, but my mom looked at me and asked me if I wanted to testify. And I told her the truth, and I said, I don't, but I need you to pick us. And she could not do it. And so she did the only thing she could do, and that was sign some papers to give my dad custody of us. But that's just the hard part. Like, to sit there and have your mom not be able to choose you is a hard thing to have happen. And so,
Ashley, I just want to tell you, because I feel like I'm supposed to, I have the exact same experience with my mom choosing an abusive man over my sister and I. I totally relate. There's nothing that you feel more alone in the world than when that happens.
Yeah.
And when you said that your mom signed over custody or gave custody, was there a part of you, though, that was proud of her that she made a good decision there, or did it feel really just empty?
I think it just felt broken because she was everything that I had ever known. Like I said, my dad wasn't involved in the picture.
Sure.
So I didn't know what the world would look like with my dad. I know that he had another family and they had always taken priority over us. So I wasn't feeling like, oh, good, we're going to go have a better life. I thought we would feel like second-rate, citizens in another home. And I know that my mom made the best decision that she could in those moments, and so I appreciate what she did. But as a mom, it will never resonate with me being able to do that because I know I would do anything to protect my children.
When you, so moving on from that day, which again still lives in your mind like it was yesterday, not knowing what your father's home life is like, but you've already got that preconceived, we're not welcome. I think of the childhood mindset. How did that entry look? How did it feel?
So I moved in with my dad as I started high school. So I think it couldn't have been the worst transition in my life as I moved to a new high school that was in Huntington North. So it was a huge school. I didn't know anybody. My grandpa ends up passing away within a few days of that, who was very, very close. He was like our father figure to us because we didn't have one. And then I move in with my dad, who quite honestly was angry with me about the process because I had to go through a custody evaluation. They asked us a bunch of questions, and he was unhappy with answers that I had given during the custody battle. So when I say I've dealt with everything that you can deal with as a parent and I can give direction on what not to do to a child, it's primarily because I've experienced every one of those things. And my dad would sit at the table and scream and yell at me for hours about anything that I said about my mom, wanting to see my mom. If she wasn't paying child support, I would get yelled at about that. I mean, I can tell you sitting in a dining room like a Spanish Inquisition, having my dad grill me for hours about what happened during your mom's house. Like, why didn't you tell her she's a piece of crap? Why didn't you tell her she needs to be paying her child support? And you get to the point where you're just so frustrated and broken that the only thing you want to do is make it stop. So I started doing those things that my dad wanted me to do to my own mom. And I feel terrible about it looking back, but I knew.
Talk about compound pain.
I don't want to, I don't want to tell my mom that she's the worst person in the world. I certainly felt that at the moment because she did give us to my dad, and it wasn't a great situation over there. We weren't getting beat by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a different form of mental abuse that I was suffering from. I was grateful that my siblings did not have to deal with it as much. It was so bad that at one point, I ended up moving out of my dad's house when I was 17. He's, like I said, I love my dad. He's doing the best that he can. He worked second shift, so he left a lot of the parenting responsibilities to my stepmom, who was a very nice lady, but we weren't her children and we weren't her priority, and it was hard. We had more financially, like living with my mom, like we had almost nothing. We were the Christmas family one year, and I still think that's an important thing to be able to give back to our community. But, we may have had money, but it was even more lonely than when I was living with my mom, who she relied on me. She needed me for something, and my dad really didn't need anything or want much of anything other than almost to get back at my mom for the years that he had. So it became a point where my mom stopped getting us because I was honestly horrible. So I didn't see her for years.
Your story is a made-for-TV movie, Ashley. And yet so incredibly relevant to, again, why I'm grateful the Lord's put you in the place He's put you. I don't want to go back in time on this story, but did you know you were poor when you were taking $40 to buy groceries for your siblings? Did you know that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We knew that I knew that we didn't have anything. There was years we would get nothing for Christmas. We didn't get birthday presents.
And you knew other kids
and
did.
I knew other kids were.
Okay.
We were on free lunches back when it wasn't something that the schools just did.
Okay.
We had to I would have to announce loudly in the cafeteria that I was on free lunches. And people always looked at you like, what?
Yeah.
What does that mean? I'm like, I get my lunch paid for by the school. And you always felt uncomfortable with it. There were times where I just didn't eat lunch because I didn't want to tell anybody that I was on free lunches. But yeah, we knew that we didn't have much of anything. We didn't get the toys that the other kids were getting. And it was, sometimes food was just what we could get. I remember one summer, all we could afford was bologna, which to this day I can't eat because we spent a whole summer eating nothing but bologna sandwiches because my mom was able to get a bunch of it for $1 a pack. And so she filled up the freezer with it, and that was what we had. She had good jobs, but not always great with money. And she would have boyfriends that did not work and would just take as much as they could. So
Sure.
it was, I watched my mom's vehicle get repossessed on multiple occasions, and I knew that wasn't something that was normal, but it felt very normal. Had furniture get repossessed that she would rent and not pay for. And one day I even asked her, why does this keep happening? And she's like, well, I could pay the bills, but then, we wouldn't be able to do this, or I could pay that and we wouldn't be able to afford the house. Yeah. And so she was making the best decisions that she could. From the time I can remember, as little as I can remember, I saved every penny that I ever got for a birthday or Christmas from anybody else, and she would regularly ask to borrow money just to pay for gas to get to work or wherever we needed to go. And I stopped even considering using it for something for myself because I knew at some point my mom would need it for the family. And that was just...
That's fascinating.
I honestly operated as a savings account for my mom because she was not capable of doing that. And it's... I don't know. It was just normal. That was normal to me. We're going to need this money later, so I'm going to keep it.
So because of what we do here at Remedy, whether it's our Get School tour in the schools or whether it's the 24-hour chat center in our work, most of the students that we talk to that are willing to come up to us and share their struggles, they have similar stories to yours. Sometimes now fentanyl's involved or something else is involved. But a lot of them are acting out with risky behaviors in their own life because they've been treated so poorly. And they're struggling now because of the compound of escapism, we call it. But your story is so different, right? You lean into being a savings account for your mom. You are taking care of your siblings, making them meals, making sure that they have probably the basics in such a profound way. what's the difference between you and so many young people today that when they're treated badly, they just start acting out, you know?
I think it's a choice that you make. You can choose to follow the same path that your family is going down, the same path that my mom was going down, or you can choose to do something different. And I'm just grateful that God put me in the place that I was at and gave me the strength to work through it, because I really don't know why we weren't removed into foster care or why I didn't go down those other paths, other than I had this goal of being a lawyer and I was going to do that. And I focused on that. When things were hard at home, I focused on what I could control as opposed to what I couldn't control. I can't make my mom's relationship be better. I can't make us not have nothing. You know, I mean, there are times where I would return broken things just to get something new, and my mom would send me in there to do it because she couldn't afford to buy something new. Yeah. You know, so I didn't want that forever, but I didn't know what anything else looked like. So you're making a choice to work through it.
Yeah. But you mentioned your grandfather earlier. Were there other trusted adults, mentors, teachers, pastors, somebody who's saying, Ashley, you don't have to live this future the way your mom's lived her life? Anyone cast a dream for you, or did you truly have kind of God intervening to give you this, I need to make healthy choices?
I would like to say that I had somebody. I think there are teachers throughout your life that have an impact on you. I can remember in second grade, you know, struggling to read because reading was not something that we focused on at home. And I remember her taking the time to kind of talk to me and, you know, instead of making me read in front of the whole class, like everybody else was having to do, she could see I was struggling with it and she would let me do it off to the side. But in terms of somebody that helped guide me to tell me, like, you can do better than what your mom is doing, I don't think so. I mean, I really do feel like God puts things on your heart and gives you a direction to try to guide you the best that you can. And I knew I didn't want what she had, but having somebody that could hold my hand and walk me through this, I would say I had my sister, and I knew we needed to get through it.
Yeah, I think of whom God calls, he installs. You know, he takes care of those things, but you're still a remarkable story. Talk to me a little bit, just for a moment, about your siblings. Obviously, they're human beings in the same home, same situation, looking to you for some type of balance, I'm sure. How did they endure that? Did they struggle as well, just with anything that caused you even more pain? You
know, so they all experienced it, obviously. Yeah. I took a lot of the burden on myself to make sure that we had food and that they were taken care of. I mean, I would make my sister breakfast before we would get onto the bus, and make sure that we had the things that we needed. Fortunately, like, she did her own homework. I didn't have to take care of anything with that. You know, I did my own homework. My younger siblings weren't bad in school. They were able to take care of it themselves. But, you know, I really tried to shield them from a lot of what was going on. Like, if there was a situation happening in the house where mom and the boyfriend were getting ready to have a fight, like, you can always tell when those things are escalating. You know, somebody's been drinking, or somebody makes a snarky comment to somebody else, and you can just sense the situation getting tense. And I would always try to get them to another room or away from it. When I became, you know, probably 10 or 11, I probably started trying to get involved and de-escalate the situation, but I learned quickly that that wasn't going to result in anything positive. I mean, my mom, while she was getting abused, was just as much the aggressor in a lot of these situations as well. I mean, she knew how to push people's buttons, and that's what she did. So it wasn't a situation where I could say, come on, Mom, we're going to go to another room and de-escalate this. She wanted it just as badly as the other person, and ultimately usually ended up in the bad side of that. I mean,
so the life that you've lived, obviously, like you said, you made choices, and I love that. You know, one of my former friends, Indianapolis Colt, Devon McDonald, says, you're not born a winner, you're not born a loser, you're born a chooser. So you're the epitome of that, and choosing. You graduate high school, you decide law school, you go to law school, you become a lawyer, you enter family practice, and then the Lord puts you on the bench and you're now in the courts. Life's perfect now, right? Like, what kinds of things, and this is where I get really vulnerable with you, what kinds of things do you mentioned the memory of the courtroom as a child. what other things do you still have to navigate so that we can normalize that it's okay to be unokay? Like, what do you still have to deal with?
As a person?
As a person, as a human.
So I'm incredibly self-conscious. I don't think very highly of myself. I still struggle to believe that I'm worth it. And it's people rarely believe that because they're like, look where you're at, look what you're doing, and but it's hard, when you have somebody that doesn't want you as much as you want them to feel like you're valued or that you're worth it. And so I'm very lucky that I have a husband that's patient with me as I continually struggle with that, my self-esteem and my self-confidence in what I'm doing. And so that's the biggest one. I don't ever want to be in a situation like my mom was. So I'm constantly trying to make sure that I'm picking good relationships with the people that I have, like not just my husband or my significant other, but who I choose to be friends with or who I'm going to bring into my life. Because as a kid that's grown up through that, that there are people that are good for you and that there are people that are bad for you. And the hard part is trying to decipher who those are. And the harder part is how you deal with them when they're people that should be good for you that really aren't. And I love my mom, but she's not somebody that's particularly good for me as a person to have a regular relationship with. I see her on the holidays. I see her occasionally for my kids' birthdays, but I don't have a relationship that I would want to have with my mom. Certainly not the relationship that I have that I want my boys to have with me as their mother. And that's a hard thing to explain to somebody. Adam and I were foster parents for a long time, and there was one girl who was a teenager, and I remember having this conversation with her about sometimes the people that you love the most aren't the ones that you can have in your life because they bring some kind of toxic relationship to you, or they bring you down a path that you don't want to go. And that's a hard thing to accept and acknowledge when you want that relationship with that person. And I see that all the time in court too, like individuals that are staying in relationships or even family members, a mom or a dad, that's dragging them down a path that they don't want to be in, but you don't know how to separate yourself from someone that should be good for you, that should want something better for you, that simply isn't capable of doing that.
Yeah. Wow. I said it earlier, I want you to talk about your amazing family. So you've already mentioned your husband, but kind of tell us the beauty now you have as being a wife and a mom to some incredible boys. Talk about that.
So I have 3 boys, 14, 13, and now 8. Adam and I both struggled to be able to have our own children, and so we decided that we were going to adopt children. We didn't have a lot of money, so doing overseas adoptions, which are very expensive, was not an option for us. And so we chose to be foster parents. Again, God was very good to me that I was naive and had no idea what I was walking into because it's not an easy process to be a foster parent. The things that these kids have experienced, even worse than what I went through, to see what they've gone through is not an easy thing to watch kids go through. But I love kids, and I knew I wanted to be a mom, and that was something that was very important to me. So when Adam and I got together, he was not necessarily wanting children, but he made the commitment with me that was something that he knew was important to me, and I was going to pursue that path, and he wanted to pursue it with me. And so we started as foster parents, and our first placement actually was our middle son, who's now 13, and we got him when he was 2 days old. I took him home from the hospital, so we were the only family that he's ever known, and he had drug exposure when he was born, which is why he was removed from the home. And never in my wildest dreams did I think that the first child that I would take home would be an infant, let alone one that I would get to keep for the rest of my life. And he's
beautiful.
Wonderful boy. And then our second placement that we got was my oldest son, who we got when he was 2 years old. And then we decided fostering was very, very hard. We went 4 years trying to get custody through the adoption process with my oldest one, and it was a long, very difficult process, very emotional for you as a parent that's trying to parent this child that might ultimately not be yours, and then going through the court system as the CHINS process played out was hard. So we decided that we weren't going to renew our license. after 4 years. And so I'd always really kind of wanted a girl. God had other plans again.
Yeah.
And so he'd always told me he would, if we want to try to have a girl later on, would go through a different route to do that. And as a surprise, one day I was going to meet my husband for March Madness basketball, and I got a call from somebody that knew me from fostering and said, I have a baby boy that I need to place. Would you guys be interested in taking him? She knew me that I had one son that's African American, my middle son is white, and this particular child was biracial, and so she knew his race was not going to have any impact on us. And I remember thinking, like, this can't be real. Like, this isn't how people get to adopt a baby. And so I called my husband, who was very kind, and said, what do you want to do? And I'm like, are you able, like, are you sure this is okay with you? And he said, if you want to do it, let's go do it. So 2 hours later, I picked up my third son,
my goodness,
who was a month old.
That's amazing.
And my legal assistant at the time had to go with me to notarize all the paperwork. And so I was like,
is this in my job description?
She goes, what's happening? I was like, do you mind going with me? And she's like,
wow. Still
this day is one of the greatest days of her life. I remember like showing up to pick him up thinking this isn't really happening. Yeah. And I immediately hand the baby off to my legal assistant because I'm in lawyer mode. I'm going to get all this paperwork signed.
That's right.
And then I remember looking at him briefly thinking like, okay, it's a real baby. And then passing him off. And then we got out to the car and she goes, did that really just happen? I go, I think so. Do I have a baby? And she goes, yeah. And I walk back to work, and a couple of the partners come up and see me. He's like, oh, whose baby is this? And I'm like, it's mine.
I just picked this up.
And he goes, they're like, no, whose baby is it? And I remember saying, no, it's really mine. And the other lawyer looks at me, he's like, I think she's telling the truth.
This is like Amazon same-day delivery to a different level.
Yeah, exactly. I remember, and my kids had no idea it was happening. Wow. So I have, at this point, like a 4 and 5 year old who I pick up from Y Care and after school, and I'm like, Mom, what's this? I'm like, it's your baby brother. And the great thing about that is that they never questioned it. It was just like, that's awesome. Okay, I have a baby brother.
Welcome to the family.
And my family still is waiting for another spontaneous child to show up. But my husband did tell me that I was not allowed to have any more creatures in the house.
There's rules.
Children or creatures. Otherwise,
no puppies either. A pickup puppy.
No.
Okay, gotcha.
I try to fish, and he didn't like that either.
Oh, okay, good. Well, Ashley, I can't tell you how much of a blessing this has been. I'm gonna put you on the spot one last time, and someone watching this is either a teenager themselves with a story that is broken, and they found us via a Google search, or they found us from a school event, or they just found us because that's how things happen. And I want you to encourage them as much as you can, like you have chosen to do, to just, again, find that purpose, live on purpose, keep the eyes on the prize, talk to your future self, whatever you want to say. What would you say to them today?
Your circumstances don't define you. You have a choice to make, and there's hope for something better. You can choose to be better than what you are right now, where you are right now, and do something great and give back to somebody else in the future that needs you right now.
Thank you. Grateful for your story, grateful for your friendship, and grateful for what you do in our community. It's a huge, huge deal. And just let us know how we can support you and what you do as well.
Thank you.
All right.